All right, let's take a look at 6.1 public goods. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. Overall, what we're going to understand in Unit 6 is this idea that the private sector might fail to produce goods and services that society actually needs, so the government has to step in order to provide these goods. So, a public good is an economic good that is provided by the government in the public sector because the free market has failed to produce it. And the difference between the public and the private sector is the public sector is the market that has public goods in it, provided by the government at whatever level, federal, state, local. The private sector is the free market for economic goods that is created by consumers, firms who demand products. The consumers demand the products, the firms supply the products. That's the private sector. Now, public good is an example of a market failure because the free market sometimes fails to produce the actual essential goods that are needed by society. And so when that market failure comes into play, in order to meet the demand that the consumers have, the government supplies the good instead. A free rider then is an individual that benefits from using a public good without paying for it. You can kind of use this as a I guess a picture in your head. So a free rider prevents the supplier from generating the revenue that they need to produce new public goods. So they're not actually helping with the payment of those goods if they're going to demand those goods. Therefore, new public goods are not going to be able to be created because, again, scarcity is a thing. So there's two ways that a government can solve this problem. Either number one, they can find new ways to punish those free riders by taxing all citizens who are eligible to use that public good, or they can use tax revenue to fund public goods and services so they could increase the tax revenue for that. Now, for a true public good, we have to understand the difference between non-exclusion and shared consumption. Non-exclusion is an element of a public good where everyone can use the good, and those who do not pay cannot be excluded from using it. So everybody can use it. Those who don't pay cannot be excluded from using it. So there are free riders, but whether or not you are a free rider, that doesn't mean that you can't use the good. And shared consumption is an element of a public good where one person's consumption does not reduce the usefulness of the good to other people. And I'm going to look at some economic goods right here and walk you through the difference between non-exclusion and shared consumption. Again, non-exclusion, just because you don't pay into it doesn't mean you can't use it. And the shared consumption being this is a public good where one person's consumption does not reduce the usefulness of the good to somebody else. Okay, so a good example of both would be police and firefighters. They are both non-exclusion, everybody can use it, and shared consumption. Another good example of both would be a national park. Non-exclusion, everybody can use it, whether or not you're actually paying for it, and shared consumption. One more good example would be an interstate highway, where I use it, whether or not I've really paid into it, but my consumption of it doesn't reduce the usefulness of it to other people. Maybe traffic and things like that, but that would be that. A couple examples of neither would be dinner at a restaurant. Okay, again, you have to, that's more of a private sector type deal. And a new house, that would be a private sector deal. Let's look at some of the differences where it only is one or the other. An example of something that is just non-exclusion would be a charitable food bank. Definitely not shared consumption, but it's more non-exclusion, where people who do not pay cannot be excluded from using it. Typically, food banks come up and are in play for people that actually cannot afford it. Okay, a couple of examples of shared consumption would be a college education and healthcare. Moving and grooving, MSB, MSC, marginal social benefit, marginal social cost. Defining marginal social benefit is the benefit gained by society with the consumption of an additional unit, remember marginal, additional unit of a public good or service. So it's measured by the number of people that are willing to pay for an additional unit of a public good or service. And here's our formula for it. Our change in total social benefit that an economist has figured out for public parks divided by the change in quantity. So when you're finding MSB right here, just look at the change here over the change in quantity. Okay, same thing we've been doing with margin. MSC, you have the change in total social cost over the change in the quantity of goods. So same thing, change here over change here. Notice that it'll change by the same rate. on each one, and that's because MSC is the cost paid by society to produce an additional unit of the public good. So it's basically the cost of it by society, whether that's measured in tax revenue collected from somebody or something like that. Okay. So once you calculate MSB and MSC, we're still going to do the same thing. You figure out how many public parks are going to be built in this town. We're going to go up until MSB equals MSC, and you'll notice that it will be at 5. This one should be 500, and this one should be 500. Make sure you fill out the whole chart, though. If our marginal social cost of each public park decreases to $300, so to make a park, it costs us $300, what will be the change in the number of parks built? So if it costs us less money, that would increase us from 5 parks over to 6 parks once you pause and answer this whole thing right here. Finally, the social benefit gain from each public park, let's say it's cut in half at a social cost of $300 per park. So let's say this is $300 per park, and let's say that the benefit is cut in half. So go ahead and do that. And I'm going to let you try to answer this one. How many public parks should be built in this town? I will say it's going to be less than 5. Okay, and you don't need to explain it for that. Part D, we can just read this chart off of here, how many fire stations are going to be built. It'll be at our equilibrium of 5, where MSC and MSB intersect with one another. Using the graph, explain why 7 fire stations is not an optimal quantity. At this point, if we are at 7, we'll notice that our marginal social benefit is less than our marginal social cost. So it's not optimal because it's going to cost us more money than we actually would benefit off of producing those fire stations. So there would be just too many fire stations. So our MSC would be greater than our MSB. Suppose that the social benefit gained from each fire station increases by $200. So what would that look like? Well, how does this change in the marginal social benefit impact the quantity of fire stations that should be built? So if the MSB of each fire station increased by $200, the number of fire stations should increase if we're benefiting a little bit more. The government should always go until MSB equals MSC. So originally MSB equaled MSC right here. So for the next one, the fire station is valuable to the community, and so we should increase the number of fire stations built if it's increased by $200 to going to right there. So it should be at 6. If our benefit goes up to $700. So that would be like if MSB moved. You don't need to. Instead, now suppose that the social cost of building each fire station increases by $200. Graph this change above. Okay, so we're going to graph it here. So for our MSC, if we're saying that the cost increases by $200, at every single level right here, go ahead and increase it by $200. So go from $300 to $500. Go from $400 to $600. And do the same thing throughout the whole thing so that MSC should shift from here up right there. So you graphed it, you're going to see how it changes. Ultimately, what is the impact of it? Well, because it costs us more money, we're going to end up building fewer fire stations. And that's what we got.